Joining me on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line is our favorite, the ESPN senior NBA writer and the host of the Brian Windhorst and the Hoop Collective podcast. Brian Windhorst back here on the Mercedes-Benz Vans phone line on the Rich Eisen Show. How you doing, Brian?
I'm good, Rich. Thank you.
Let's jump right into it with Kyrie Irving. Was his decision or impending decision, reported decision to return to the Nets just his only best option, do you think, for him?
You're asking a very clean question, Rich. I don't quite understand 100% all the sides on this game. I was viewing it a certain way, and then I talked to executives in the league, and they view it a completely different way. I was viewing it as this is what the Nets wanted and that this buys them time. And, you know, they can extend with him later on. It turns down the pressure. It turns down the pressure with Durant. But I talked to a number of executives who, you know, believe that this doesn't mean it's over. That, you know, the Nets made it very clear that they didn't want the status quo and that this would be potentially the status quo. So I wish I could give you a stronger answer, but all I can say right now is I don't know. I'm just going to have to wait and watch for a little bit. You know, Kyrie also has to fill out the paperwork. It's one thing to announce you're picking up the option. And, you know, normally when somebody says they're picking up the option, the paperwork is a formality. But until the Nets formally announced that Kyrie's opted into his contract, which would be a course of business, let's just not 100% assume anything. So
let's walk through it then piece by piece. Could this be the sign part of a sign and trade, right, where he signs here?
No.
What?
No, I mean, this is all. I apologize, Rich. It's all salary cap ease.
Okay.
Once you opt into a contract, there's no sign and trade. It's not possible.
Okay.
And the other thing is that a bunch of different rules happen with a sign and trade. The NBA, for specific reasons, has made sign and trades difficult. So when the Nets said to Kyrie, go ahead and look for a sign and trade, they did that knowing it was very unlikely he'd be able to find one. If you want me to go into chapter and verse as to why, I'd be glad to, or you can just trust me. It's up to you.
I will trust you. I will trust you. Yeah. I'll take your cue.
Sign and trades are, I mean, they happen, obviously, so I don't want to make it sound like they're impossible, but they're complicated because there's a whole set of rules that comes along with them. When you opt into a contract, then you can be traded, but it's just a standard trade. But you obviously, the only way you can trade a free agent is a sign and trade, and Kyrie will now not be a free agent. The question is he just going to be back with the Nets and everybody's going to sing Kumbaya? Because very clearly what Sean Marks, the general manager, said at the end of the season was we can't have a repeat of last year. And, you know, the idea was that there would be a contract that would have some protections for the Nets on number of games played and things like that. And with Kyrie's decision to opt in, it potentially sets up a repeat of last year.
Okay, so you're saying Kyrie's going nowhere for the upcoming season. He's in Brooklyn,
Rich,
period, end of story.
I don't know what's going to happen.
But if he can't be, can he be traded, or he's just?
Yes, he absolutely can be traded. Will he be traded? I don't know.
Okay. And so, Brian Windhorst here on the Rich Eisen Show. You've mentioned a couple times in this conversation that the Nets don't want status quo. And I know you also mentioned just yesterday that the Nets, quote unquote, would rather lose both stars than go through what they went through last season. Now, New York City has lifted its vaccine mandate, and I don't see that coming back anytime soon. So they won't go through technically what they went through last season on the vaccine mandate. What do you and the Nets mean by this? Going through last season.
Well, I think here's the thing you have to understand. We don't really know where Kevin Durant is, and if Kyrie Irving had opted out of his contract and went and signed with the Lakers, and the Nets lost Kyrie Irving for nothing, the belief in the league, and I mean, you know, Kevin could feel one way on Monday and a different on Tuesday. So I want to be 1,000% clear here that this is all very fluid. But the belief in the league is that Durant would not be comfortable remaining with the Nets in that situation. So when the Nets were playing hardball with Kyrie, and they were basically saying, we're not going to give you the maximum contract extension that you want, and Kyrie was saber-rattling that he was going to opt out of his contract because asking for permission to look for a sign and trade, Rich, meant he was going to opt out of his contract. That one has to go with the other.
Mm-hmm.
So Kyrie was saber-rattling, and the Nets were saber-rattling. And so if the Nets were risking Kyrie walking, which they 1 billion% were, they knew that they were risking Durant asking for a trade. And the reason that they were playing hardball with Kyrie was because they wanted to get into an understanding or a contract that they had some protection over the way Kyrie went about the last couple of seasons. And so my point was, their strategy was, even if this costs us Durant, we are not going to bend down to fold towards Kyrie. And it wasn't just about the vaccine mandate. The entire way Kyrie has operated within the Nets for the last few years was building towards last season. So it's really more about, Kyrie has openly said, I don't need a coach. I'm the general manager. Kevin and I are the general managers. It's much more than just about the vaccine mandate there.
So was the reason why there were a few takers on the sign and trade cap related or roster related, or just the league kind of knows what's at the large part of the iceberg? We're just in the basketball viewing nation outside of the insider circle, seeing just the tip. Does
right.
Kyrie have a reputation that nobody wants a piece of him after what happened with the Celtics and what's going on with the Nets right now?
Yeah, I think the issue is if you sign and trade for a player, the contract has to be for at least 3 years. And for the same reason the Nets were worried about giving a long-term contract, any team would be worried about giving a long-term contract. And then, Rich, when you sign and trade for a player, like the Lakers, for example, the Lakers' payroll next year is, I believe right now, projected to be around $150 million. Once you sign and trade for a player, it becomes an NFL situation. You are hard capped. You absolutely cannot go above a certain number. And so if the Lakers had signed and traded for Kyrie, let's just say for the sake of argument, the Nets had an undying love for Russell Westbrook, and they would have taken Russell Westbrook in a sign and trade. They wouldn't have, but let's just say for the sake of argument, they would have. Taking Kyrie Irving in a sign and trade would have hard capped the Lakers, and they couldn't fill out the rest of their roster. So just from a mechanical standpoint, the Lakers couldn't do a sign and trade with Kyrie unless he was willing to take a significant pay cut. And even in that situation, they would have had to guarantee him a lot more money. The Lakers were much more interested in giving him a 1-year, $6 million deal, as you can imagine.
Yes.
And we're more interested in now, if they trade for him now, if something happens in the next few days or next few weeks and the Lakers all of a sudden can trade for Kyrie, they wouldn't have to guarantee more years. They wouldn't have to be hard capped. So I know that this is extremely dense, but a sign and trade was just never going to happen. And so really the bedrock issue is this. We wipe away all that stuff. The bedrock issue is this, is the owner of the Brooklyn Nets, Joe Tsai, willing to have his team go through another season with Kyrie Irving behaving the way he has done for the last couple of years, or is he gonna say he wants a change? Because what Sean Marks, with Joe Tsai's blessing, said is that they wanted a change, and what Kyrie Irving said was, "See you in the fall." And to me, that's a guy who is like, okay, you don't want to extend me, you don't want to help me on a sign and trade, see you in the fall. I didn't take that quote as a quote of brotherly love, but what do I know?
So let me just ask you this then, and then we'll move on just to a couple other items just on from the Nets. So Durant, they're running the risk, you said, the Nets, of having him opt out and just say, I want out. I'm asking for a trade. And this may be the most naive question I've ever asked you, Brian, in the near 8 years that you've been kind enough to keep calling into the show and I ask. What if the Nets let's hear me out. What if the Nets, if Durant says, I want to trade, what if they just say no?
Yeah.
What if they just say no to that?
They would say, Kevin, we love you, and you're under contract for 4 more years.
Right. What if they just say no? What would happen?
Yeah, that would be an interesting thing, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
We're in an era right now in the NBA where the contracts really don't matter. And I don't know what I've watched it get more and more and more out there. I mean, Ben Simmons did the same thing a year ago. He had 4 years on his contract. Now the difference was Simmons was coming off of a bad finish to the year, so his value was a bit more complicated. He also had a back injury, which we found out was pretty darn severe. But Ben Simmons essentially did the same thing. He said, I don't want to be here anymore. And they said, well, you got a contract. And he goes, okay, I'm not going to show up until you trade me. And it was messy, and it was expensive, and Ben Simmons got his way. And Adam Silver has mentioned this, that honoring of contracts has to matter. I mean, Kyrie Irving, I don't know if he's still on the board, but I'm fairly certain is the vice president of the players union. Mm-hmm. And I was interested for a minute there whether he was going to honor his contract. So they always say in the entertainment business, Rich, right? A contract is over when the talent says it's over. That's been the kind of the rule of the road in the NBA, and it's kind of the same in the NFL, isn't it, Rich? You got a contract, you're not heckling, you just don't show up, right?
Well, I mean, in the NFL, that's the way it was for a very long time. But we're seeing now, for just the first time in the near 20 years that I've been doing the NFL Network and the NFL only thing on the cable side of matters, is Davante Adams saying I want out, and they're like, okay. We're just now beginning to see that on occasion, rare occasions, but most of the occasions the NFL is saying it's tough. You're here.
Guys would hold out. Sometimes they would lose, I guess, but guys would hold out and not show up. They want a new contract.
Right. 1 or 2 games into the season when they don't get a paycheck. That's when they're like, okay. And that's what happened with Emmitt Smith in the 90s. I mean, it's so rare to see a guy hold out into the season. And that's why I'm just wondering, what if the Nets just tell Durant, no, you're
might.
Here.
And you know what, Rich? Kevin Durant loves playing. He loves the game so much.
That's great.
The stuff off the court, he sometimes gets, sideways on, but he loves playing. I covered him in Tokyo at the Olympics last year, and I asked him, I go, Kevin, you've got gold medals. You're coming off an Achilles. I mean, why are you here? He's like, I love playing. And so to me, what Ben Simmons did last year, which was not play, that's the antithesis of Kevin Durant. Kevin Durant would play every day of the year if he could. He probably pretty much does. So this is a different type of guy. I don't know if that's what he could do. But I also know he's 34 years old, and he wants to be on a championship contender. He came there to be on a championship contender. So, look, at the end of the day, this could be Kyrie Irving back. And, by the way, this is something that nobody seems to really be talking about. They got a good team. Assuming that Ben Simmons is going to be healthy, I mean, I guess I can't assume anything with him, but let's just, for the sake of this conversation, say he's going to be. He's going to be a tremendous difference maker defensively. Joe Harris, who missed all of last season, is a great shooter. He'll be back. Seth Curry, who they got in the Simmons trade, is a great shooter. They're going to have a great shooting team. They got this really promising rookie, in my opinion, who was a rookie last year named Cam Thomas, who's an explosive offensive player. They got a top 5, 7, whatever player still. I still think Durant's a top 5 player. They got Kyrie, who when he plays is breathtaking. I know he doesn't play that much, but he's breathtaking when he plays. I mean, I wouldn't pick them to win the title, but they're a contender. So, maybe everything does get smoothed over and everything's fine by the fall, but I don't know. All
right, Brian Windhorst, in a couple minutes I have left with you here on the Rich Eisen Show. Just some quick hitters, best we can. Westbrook opting back in. What does that mean? What are the next steps for the Lakers? No surprise, $47 million. You're going to opt into that all day. So what do you have? What's the Lakers' next moves, if any? Now that
well, Rich, they've only got 6 guys under contract, and a couple of them are bench players. So I don't know what their team's going to look like. And they have to be very judicious with that $6 million thing that they now aren't going to be able to use on Kyrie. They have to hit on that. They are getting Kendrick Nunn, who missed all of last season, back. But they need AD and LeBron to be healthy. That's number one. But in all honesty, they finished, 11th last year in the Western Conference. Even if they get a lot better, they're still going to be potentially competing for a back-end playoff spot, which is why the Kyrie thing was so tantalizing, because they really don't have any other avenues to dramatically improve the talent on their roster. They're just going to have to be better with the talent they have. With LeBron and Anthony Davis, you have a chance to win any game. I just don't know what the rest of that roster is going to look like, how they're going to look over 82. They have a new coach. We'll see what Darvin Ham brings. He could potentially change their mentality a little bit, especially defensively, because they lost their defensive edge last season. But with what I see right now, I'm not bullish on their chances this year.
And I'm always fascinated by Riley. What's he thinking? What's his plan that he's hatching right now in South Florida?
Well, they're watching the Nets thing very, very closely, because if there's any wiggle room at all there, they're keeping an eye out. Both Miami and Phoenix, in my opinion. If Durant were somehow – I want to be 1,000,000,000% clear, Rich. I don't know what's going to happen in Brooklyn, okay? I just don't know. But if some event happens where Durant does become available, I think Miami and Phoenix are two teams that have the draw that Durant would want to play on a championship contender, and have the pieces and parts that they could offer Brooklyn in trade. And so I'm sure that Pat Riley is sitting there waiting for that window. If it may never open, but if it does, I'm sure they're going to try to be aggressive on that.
I've watched A Beautiful Mind. I've watched, Rain Man. I've watched all these movies where people, think differently, and, I'm trying to look at things from a completely different angle. So you help me with this one, Brian Windhorst. What the hell were the Knicks up to on draft night? What was their plan? What was it?
Their plan was to clear salary cap space, and they did that. So now we wait. They also have now, Rich, they have 8 first-round draft picks that they can trade. And something's going to happen with that. I'm waiting to see what.
Is it for Brunson and the Mavericks? Are they going to try and sneak him out? I mean, what's their plan? Who are they trying to get?
Yeah, they definitely are interested in him, and they're not going to take that many draft picks to get him. If they do, I think that's a possibility they could get him, but they have to have more in their sights. Jalen Brunson is an excellent player, but he's not a star.
Brian Windhorst, thanks for the time. I know your life's going to get more hectic over the next couple of weeks. Look for my call in July. Thanks again, Brian. Have a great rest of the day. That's Brian Windhorst, the one and only at Windhorst ESPN. Must follow. I follow him, as always. Makes me smarter right here on The Rich Eisen Show.